In January of this year, Konami launched Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. It's quickly become one of my most played games, and through high highs and low lows, I and about 20 million other people have been thoroughly enjoying it. But it's one thing for a free-to-play game to be actually good, it's another to keep players coming back, lest you run the risk of pissing off your established player base.
We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC.
Is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
One way to do this is with events. Events are vital for the survival of these types of games, to shake up the formula, to breathe new life, and get new players. So far there have been 5 events for the game, all of which have been radically different, and I wanted to look back on them and give my thoughts on how they've been so far. I also wanted to talk about how the game overall was affected, what decks people used the most, what strategies were used in these events, and what my own personal experience was. With that being said, first up was the Rareness Festival back in the second month of the game's life, which is honestly a bit of a surprise if you think about it. It's not something super nostalgic like fusion summoning, or even the latest thing Konami would have wanted to promote like link summoning, but honestly, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of people did from Yu-Gi-Oh! Around the time of Zexal, where Rareness summoning was introduced.
I have seen you lose to a vending machine. Are you sure this is wise?
Yeah! It makes sense to have this be the jumping on point, as it's a pretty simple summoning method to grasp, and you can tell Konami really wanted this event to be friendly to new players, including providing disappointing loner decks for new players. The ban list included a lot of the most powerful cards in ranked, like Eldritch, True Dracos, Sub-Terrors, and even a lot of the cards that messed with special summoning like Artifact Scythe, Contact Sea, and Dogmaticas. And you know what? These were all good steps to get new players invested, especially when you consider how many amazing Xyz archetypes there were. There's Utopia, Zodiac, Lyrilusk, Raid Raptors, Galaxy Photon, Constellar, Water Xyz, Time Thief. What about Phantom Knights? Just so many great strategies and styles. Surely this event was going to go off swimmingly. And then Konami screwed up the rewards! See, with all the events, you earn rewards with how many medals you've earned. Originally you won 300 medals for winning and 100 for losing without surrendering. Statistically, this meant it was actually more efficient to lose on purpose than actually try to win, which meant a lot of
I discovered the pleasure of pain.
Yeah, so the definitive deck of the festival was none of those great archetypes I mentioned. It was what I like to call suicide decks. Decks dedicated to knocking yourself out as quickly as possible. Konami realized this and later fixed the rewards so that it's the current model, where winning gets you 500 medals and losing gets you 50. But you know what? It was kind of fun. It was funny purposely stopping their own self-harm to keep them in the game. One particularly funny grief came from fellow YouTuber Farfa, where he developed a deck to heal his opponent and keep him in the game.
Back up to 8,000! You're staying right fucking here!
Mind you, even after Konami fixed the rewards, it didn't help, because there was another Xyz deck that was also very good at raking up medals. Overall, the Xyz Festival was kind of a mess. A funny mess, but a mess nonetheless. The event after that was a bit different, as it was the NNR Rarity Festival. A festival where the only cards you could use were normal and rare value cards. No super rares or ultra rares here. This is actually a pretty crazy ruling, because you'd be really surprised just how many of the most widely used staple cards and archetypes in the game fall under the no-go list. And Konami went hard on stopping any kind of self-burn whatsoever. And you know what? I loved this event. This event was really fun and went off without a hitch. I think honestly the best kind of events for this game are the ones that make you really think outside of the box for your deck. And this event did that beautifully. I used vampires in this event, and while I was locked out of a lot of the great cards like Vampire Voivode, Fräulein, or Domination, I was able to work out some pretty great moves even without them. For example, I could use Shadow Vampire to summon out Red Baron, and then use Red Baron to swap out one of my opponent's monsters for Shadow Vampire. Pop Shadow Vampire, and then at the end of the battle phase, I get him back. Sweet! And it wasn't just vampires that were a surprising success. There were plenty of other decks that worked out really well. It was cool seeing some decks get the time of day like Megaliths and Metal Foes. Plus you forget how many really good cards aren't necessarily harder to find. I adored this festival. Top marks. After a festival that good, we went back to an extra deck themed festival with the Syncro Festival. Master Duel had a lot more of a solid fan base by this point, so you have much less of a band happy list. And for the first time, the loner decks were actually kinda good, Look, I'll be honest, I don't play that many Synchro decks. I have Synchro monsters in quite a few decks, and nowadays DDD Synchro and Sword Soul are two decks I adore. And I also quite like Super Heavy Samurai and Flower Guardians, but I've come to find out a lot of my most hated decks are Synchro decks. Virtual Worlds, Synchrons, and, of course, Adamanticators. So yeah, with those decks free to roam, it drove the festival to a slow crawl. But sadly, they weren't the worst of it, because Konami, when they were unbanning a lot of cards, sadly let one archetype loose. True Draco. Look, I appreciate True Draco for the fact it's a really good deck to build on a budget. But sweet genius, duels against them were a slow, painful slog, and they were everywhere. Oh, and even worse, for some reason, they also let barrier statues loose, meaning awful, awful stall decks, which... Look, not gonna lie, I hated this festival. It just wasn't a fun time and really drove me up the wall. Well, after that bit of tedium, we had the Fusion Festival, which... Okay, before I talk about this event, am I the only one who found it funny that the new pack they brought over around this one had great support for synchros, but fusion monsters only had like two big things? Masquerade the Blazing Dragon and some other one. Anyhow, after letting a little too much loose, Konami heavily tweaked the ban list, focusing primarily on the really annoying stall plays, thank goodness. While True Draco was here to stay, we do get quite a number of cards being freed, like Eldritch at 1 and Meteorus Draconis. Yay! And while I didn't like it as much as NNR, this was a lot more of what I like, and probably my second favorite so far. I think it helps that with Fusion, there's a lot more variety without being as tedious. You got your more aggro decks like Fluffles, Lunalights, and Cyber Dragons. You got stuff that's a little more control focused like Invoke Shadows or Despia Dark Lords, and plenty of ones that can pull off crazy combos like Pendulum Magicians. I, naturally, being the culture man I am, went with Heroes. I've been waiting for a chance to use Heroes for an event like this, and I had a really wonderful time. I had a blast using monsters like Darklaw, Malicious Bane, Sunriser, and... I think there was one more, Oh yeah! Well, there was no definitive deck just due to the variety. DPE was the definitive card. Everyone was using DPE, and you could not avoid him. And look, I know plenty of people have made memes about him and how overused and annoying he can be. But dude, I will happily take that over more of this. But yeah, DPE overuse aside, I rather enjoyed Fusion Fest. Also, you got an avatar of a noodle cup. 10 out of 10! And finally, we've come to the final event of Master Duel so far, the Limit 1 Festival. I don't think anyone was expecting this event. I think most people were expecting a Link Festival or somehow a Pendulum Festival. Basically, we had to go back to making decks how I essentially made decks back when I was 9. So what's funny about this festival? It might be my favorite so far, mostly for two reasons. First of all, this ban list is gloriously simple, while also dealing with cards that have been some of the most problematic in the game. Verde Anaconda, True King of Calamities, and Crushron Hulk were banned, as well as returning True Draco Fighter to the ban list. Thank the Lord. But the other thing is that honestly, this is the festival that had the most variety. The Limit 1 format is one that completely shakes up the game, but with the right deck build can be used rather effectively. For example, while normally Sword Soul dominates in rank, it's not that good in this format just due to how limited the rest of the cards are. However, Tri-Brigade Zoo, a rather good archetype already, is amazing in this format due to Tri-Brigade working so well with so many other beast decks. And yes, I know I made fun of Tri-Brigade Zoo before, I'm sorry! It's really fun seeing how some decks can be made to work well with this format. Decks like Pendulum Magicians, Heroes, Despia Dark Lords, and Invoke Shadows work so well in this format. It was honestly really fun to experiment with decks I had already and see what worked and what didn't. Heck, using Alistair the Invoker in the Limit 1 for Despia Dark Lord made me realize how good it works for that deck overall. That's the sign of a great event right there. Something that's not only fun in the moment, but also makes you reevaluate your actual decks. So yeah, this was definitely my favorite festival so far. I loved this one. And there we go, that's all the events. Some were great, some weren't the best. I'll still happily take part in them just because as someone who likes experimenting with different decks, it's a lot of fun for me. Now I'm not certain about the future, but I can hazard a guess. Doubtless a Link Festival will probably happen soon, especially if data miners are to be believed. A Pendulum Festival could be tricky, but I'm interested to see how it could be made to work. I've also heard tell of an Attribute Festival where you're locked down to one attribute for your deck, which actually could be really cool. Especially given how many people forget what attributes certain cards are. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. Just don't let them out. Ever.